Hello everyone, and I hope you are studying well for the Kerygma. Okay, today I'm going to talk about chapter 52, 53, and 54. Okay, ready for that? Now, what does Isaiah chapter 52 talk about? This chapter is full of hope and encouragement, and it highlights the promise of redemption and salvation for God's people. Okay, so first message in 52 is Wake up, Jerusalem. It begins with a call to the city of Jerusalem to wake up and put on a beautiful garment. This is a symbol of the restoration and renewal that God is promising. The city that once suffered humiliation and defeat will now be clothed in strength and splendor. God is telling his people that the time of suffering is over and they will be free from oppression. Now, this chapter also continues with a powerful declaration that God's people will no longer be enslaved or oppressed by foreign nations. Beautiful in verse 3, God says, You were sold for nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. This means that the freedom won't be bought with wealth, but will come directly from God's intervention and help. God speaks about his name being profaned among the nations because of Israel's captivity. But he also promises that his name will be honored again. When God's people are redeemed, the nations will recognize God's power and holiness. This reminds us of the importance of honoring God's name and living in a way that reflects his holiness. One of the most famous verses in this chapter is verse 7, where it says, How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, and who announces salvation, who says to Zion, Your God reigns. This verse is celebrating those who bring the good news of God's reign and salvation. It is also a reminder that we too are called to share God's message of hope and peace with others. Isaiah describes the joy that will come with salvation. The people of Jerusalem are encouraged to sing together with joy because the Lord has comforted his people and redeemed Jerusalem. The nations will see God's power and the salvation he brings. God tells his people to leave Babylon and go out with joy. Now, they are not to touch anything unclean, symbolizing the need to remain pure and holy. God reassures them that they won't go out in haste or in fear because He will go before them and He will be their rear guard. This means God's presence will protect them on all sides. Isn't this chapter a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness and the hope we have in His promises? As you study this chapter, remember that God's redemption is not just a past event, but a present reality for all who trust Him. Now let's talk about chapter 53. In chapter 53, it is one of the most profound and prophetic chapters in the entire Bible. This chapter is often referred to as the suffering servant passage. Have you heard this? I'm sure. And it is considered by many to be a prophecy about the Messiah, our Jesus, who would suffer for the sins of the world. Okay, so here we talk about the suffering servant. This chapter begins by describing a servant who is not outwardly impressive. He is someone who is despised and rejected by people, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Now, people did not recognize his significance and they all turned their backs on this particular suffering servant. Who is it? Messiah Jesus. This highlights the humility of the servant who does not fit the expected image of a powerful leader. He is a very humble servant. Now, this servant is said to bear our griefs and carry our sorrows. He was wounded for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. His suffering was for our healing and peace. This is a powerful image of substitutionary atonement. The idea that the servant suffers not for his own sins, but for the sins of others. Okay? Then, despite being oppressed and afflicted, the suffering servant does not open his mouth in protest. He is compared to a lamb led to slaughter, silently accepting his fate. He is unjustly condemned and buried with the wicked, though he had done nothing, no violence or deceit. This chapter concludes by revealing that the servant's suffering was part of God's plan. It was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, but this suffering will lead to the justification of many, and the servant, though he suffers, will be exalted because he bore the sins of many and made intercession for transgressors. All right. So this is the conclusion. Chapter 53 is a powerful reminder of the sacrificial love and the profound mystery of the suffering. The servant's willingness to suffer for others is a central theme in Christian theology, as we all know. And that's why it is reflecting the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Now, we'll talk about chapter 54. Isaiah chapter 54 is a chapter filled with hope and promise. It's a message from God to his people, assuring them of his everlasting love and the bright future he has planned for them. The chapter begins with a call to Israel, depicted as a barren woman, to sing and rejoice now. Why? God is telling his people that although they might have felt abandoned or desolate, he will make them flourish new. This is a reminder that God is always watching over us. Even in our most difficult times, he has plans to bless us beyond our imagination. Now, there's an everlasting covenant of peace which is talked about here. God refers to the covenant he made with Noah, promising that he will never again flood the earth. Similarly, God is now promising that his love for Israel will never be taken away. This is like God telling us that no matter what happens, his love for us is constant and unshakable. It's a beautiful assurance that we are never alone and God is always with us. Now, God also promises that no weapon formed against Israel will prosper. This means that God will protect his people from harm and ensure their success. For us, this is a powerful message that with God on our side, we can face any challenge. We should always trust in his protection. This chapter paints a picture of a glorious future for Zion, where its foundations are laid with precious stones and its walls with jewels. This symbolizes the beauty and strength that God will restore to his people. This tells us that a future with God is bright and beautiful. No matter our current situation, however it is, God has something amazing in store for us, right? So, chapter 54 is a chapter filled with hope, reassurance, and the promise of a bright future. It reminds us that God's love for us is eternal, and no matter what we face, He's there to protect us and bless us abundantly. All right? So, all the best. Read through the Bible and try to solve the MCQ questions, which I've given the link below. And I hope you are studying well.